How many potential bowls do you see right here? Hi, I'm Kent, and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today I've got this great big piece of wood that I've turned into a nice large bowl blank. Now, this is a lot of wood to be just turning one large bowl. It sure would be a waste to not use up all of the inside of this bowl blank. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Today I'm going to core out 3 different bowls from this one bowl blank. Let me set this down. It's getting a little heavy. When you've got a large bowl blank like that, and this is actually fresh green wood that's wet and it's heavy, it would make a lot of really cool shavings, but if I were to turn just one bowl from this and remove that entire interior, there's going to be a lot of shavings and a lot of waste, a lot to clean up. But instead of wasting that, we can use the inside portion of this larger bowl to make 2 more bowls, and that's what I'm going to show you. I use the Oneway Coring System, and I'm going to demonstrate that today, and you can check it out. Now, the bowls that we're going to turn are going to be once turned wet, and then I'm going to seal the end grain, and we're going to set them aside to dry, so later they can be turned a second time. That's called twice turning. If you'd like to learn more about that, check out my video all on twice turning and why you might want to try this to get some really nice round bowls in the future. All right, so the first thing I need to do is I need to rough the outside of the main bowl, and then we'll set up the coring system and start coring. So let's get started. All right, I need to find the center of this bowl blank. So I simply just measure across, and I measure across in a couple different areas and mark those, and then I've got a really good idea where the center of this blank is. Now for a piece this size, I'm going to use a faceplate. Faceplate, especially this 6-inch or approximately 15 centimeter faceplate, is really nice for holding this bowl blank very secure on the lathe. Now I'm going to put about 6 screws in this. I don't have to fill in all of those screw holes. This will give me a good secure connection to the lathe. If you want to learn more about how to attach a bowl blank to the lathe, check out my video on 3 different ways to attach bowl blanks to the lathe. You definitely want to make sure you have an appropriately sized faceplate for your blank. And when you come up to the headstock like this, you want to support the bowl blank and get that faceplate lined up with the threads and turn the hand wheel only. This is a real good way to mess up the threads on the headstock if you start trying to spin that bowl blank. Those threads and the weight of that bowl blank can really do some damage there, so you want to be careful and just turn the hand wheel when you're doing that. All right, so I'm going to bring the tailstock up for a little extra support. I'm using my 5/8 inch swept back bowl gouge to start the roughing process here. I'm essentially going to take off like a 45-degree angle, start cutting off the side angle, and that's going to start shaping the base of the bowl as well. I'm using a kind of a sweeping cut with the tip of the gouge pointed to the left at about 10 o'clock. You also want to bring that tool rest up close, stop periodically and move that up so you get good support. But I'm using a sweeping cut, and I'm allowing that left wing to really dig in and just tear out material. I'm not really concerned about making a nice smooth cut here. I just want to get material removed from this blank to start making that outer shape. Because we're using the Oneway Coring System, they are basically like a hemispherical shape, so we want a relatively round bowl blank. The blank that I'm going to be making, or the blanks I'm going to be making from this, will be relatively thick, so after they dry and we twice turn them, and after they've distorted, I'll be able to still make some other final design changes in that, so there's plenty of material to work with. We just keep working one pass after another to take this whole side down. Now I still have some bark that's included in this section, so I'm getting a little skipping and some bouncing going on because of that bark area. Now I've rotated my body here a little bit, and I'm doing more of a scraping, pulling cut, and you can see how that is basically ripping the material out a little bit quicker. The darker patches you see spinning there is the bark area. This is real green, freshly cut pecan. It's a pretty wood, and it's got some really cool grain patterns in it. It's got some heartwood and some patterns. It's from a relatively large tree. I think the large bowl from this is going to be especially nice once it's finished. So twice turning essentially is turning it once like we're doing now while the wood is still wet. And we're going to turn it with the wall thickness is about 10% of the diameter. So that means it's going to have a relatively thick wall. And the reason for that is when the wall and the bowl dries, it's going to distort. And typically the side grain areas will pull inward and the end grain will push out. So it makes more of an oval shape. Well, if we make the wall too thin at this point and the bowl is oval shaped and we try to put it back on the lathe, there may not be enough meat or wood material to actually turn a full circle. That's why we want to make sure that we're using about a 10% thickness compared to the diameter. So the idea here is we'll turn this while it's wet, just to a rough shape that's thick, and we'll put it away and let it dry. And after it's dried, technically it's equalized. Wood is never really dried, but it's basically equalized to its environment. Then we put it back on the lathe. It'll be distorted, but we can true it up. We can true up the exterior and shape the exterior, and then turn the interior. And you've got this really nice, relatively dry finished piece that most likely won't distort anymore. So if you ever want to make a bowl that has a really true circular shape to it, there you can see that bark. I've got to get off there still. You can also see the beautiful patterns in the end grain there. If you want to make a beautiful bowl that's got a nice round shape and doesn't distort, the way you do that is you twice turn it. You need to turn it once while it's wet, like we're doing now, let it sit and dry, or put it in a dryer of some sort, or microwave dry it. If you want to learn more about microwave drying, check out my video on microwave drying bowl blanks, although this is a pretty big bowl to be drying in the microwave. More medium or smaller size bowls work well with the microwave. So basically just working this material down and getting this surface down to the shape, to the final shape, and we've got to work through that bark area. Through the bark area, there's a little bit of cambium that needs to be removed too, that surface right underneath the bark. I'm going to square up the side here, just bring the tool rest around and make it just a simple push cut across the end, so that's all nice and rounded off. Now I've got the lathe speed up to about as fast as I'm going to make this go. I want to make sure that I'm not turning too fast. This is a very large bolt blank. It's got a lot of weight and momentum, and that can become dangerous. If you're not sure about what your lathe speed should be based on the bowl that you're turning, then check out my video on wood lathe speed, because there's a lot you need to know, especially if you come from the spindle turning world. You do not turn bowls like at the same speed that you turn spindle turning. Spindle turnings can be turned at much faster RPMs than bowls. So you're going to want to check out that video. Alright, so we're starting to get the final shape here. You can start seeing the curve taking place. I'm going to make a few push cuts. Still need to remove a little bit of that cambium bark area. I'm going to make a push cut all the way around. That's the other nice thing about turning green wood, is look how long those shavings are coming off. Well, if you think about it, so the long shavings are basically, this is a side grain mounted bowl, so the grain is running sideways. So when the bowl blank goes around, it cuts side grain from end grain to end grain. Well, the end grain is kind of like the cutoff point. So what those big curls are is basically the entire side grain of the bowl coming off. And then the shavings stop at the end grain, because the end grains are about 90 degrees to the bowl, or the bowl gouge. So they kind of break off there. But when the wood is green and all of those wood cells are filled with water, especially along the end grain, then instead of breaking off like they typically do, they can be turned sometimes continuously. So when you get really wet wood, you can turn shavings that almost never end. They just keep spiraling off there because they're not breaking when they come around to the end grain portion of it. This is my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. This is going to give me a little bit more refined cut. I'm just doing this in kind of a quick cleanup cut. I'm not trying to make like a finished cut here. We don't have to do any kind of detailed work as far as making finishing surfaces on it. All right, so the shape's pretty much there. Now I'm going to take and clean up the base and make the tenon that will be used to attach this to the chuck. I'm just going to clean up the face of the bowl here. This is my 1/2 inch swept back bowl gouge. And I'm going to use the dividers to mark the tenon. And it turns out I've got just enough material there to make the tenon the size I want. Now I'm making the tenon larger because it's also going to distort. The bowl will distort and the tenon will distort. So I need to true up that tenon before I can put the bowl back on the chuck later after it's dried. So we'll make that a little bit oversized, which is technically not the best thing to do for a 4-jaw chuck because it doesn't have a true grip on the tenon, or it doesn't have the best grip that it possibly could when it's larger than the chuck size, but that's okay. This will work fine. I'm also defining the shoulder area, and I'm creating the bottom curve of this bowl, just kind of making that continuous. You can see how that curve will flow through the shoulder and through the tenon. The final base for this bowl will not be as big as this tenon. We're doing a nice big tenon here, so we've got plenty of support while we're working on the lathe for coring out. And then that tenon area will be removed on the final bowl to create the final foot. All right, and that was my 3/8 inch spindle detail gouge I used to make the dovetail angle on the tenon. So now we can take this off the lathe and get it turned around and ready to core. It's a pretty quick process because we're not really fussing with trying to make the outside surface perfect. We're just giving a rough shape, and then we're going to do the coring, and we can come back and do that final shaping on the second turn. Again, use that hand crank. Do not try to spin that bowl blank off the headstock because it will damage threads. All right, so basically we're just going to unscrew the faceplate. And also, if you notice the size of this faceplate, it's proportionate to this bowl blank. You wouldn't want to use anything smaller than this, and I really don't need to use anything bigger. They're pretty much faceplates of any size you can imagine. So this is my largest faceplate, but it works really good for this size of bowl. All right, so I'm putting on my 4-jaw chuck. Same technique. Use the hand wheel to bring the chuck up to the headstock. Now I have to over expand these jaws because I made that tenon a little bit larger, knowing that it's going to distort and change shape. And what happens is, instead of making each one of those curves gripping the tenon, it's the corners of those each jaw that kind of bites into it. So you don't get its true grip when you have a larger tenon. So you really want to make the tenon as close to the actual 4-jaw chuck size as possible. Okay, I'm going to use the 5/8 inch bowl gouge again to make a face cut. This is just a simple push cut. If the flute is open straight up, and that is 12 o'clock, I have the bowl gouge tilted to the right at about 1:30 as I'm making this cut. I actually have the tool rest a little bit high there. I had to reach into that center to get down. All right, I'm going to switch over to my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge and kind of make a little bit cleaner finishing cut here. Both of those bowl gouges have the same bevel profile, that 55-degree bevel swept back. I really like that because it has so much versatility and can do so many different things. Okay, so we wanted a good clean face so we can see what we've got going on here. All right, this bowl blank is about 13 inches wide or about 33 centimeters. And what I need to do is I need to mark off about 10% of that for the thickness, and that's going to be about 1.5 inches or about 33 millimeters. And I'm going to bring the tool rest up and I'm going to make a circle so I know where I'm going to be cutting. So that is going to be the diameter and the shape of the largest bull blank. Now I'm going to make a second line which is going to indicate just roughly about the thickness that I will be cutting with the coring knife. Now we're going to measure the second bowl inside there. And this is coming in at about 10 inches wide or about 25 centimeters. So 10% of that is about 1 inch or 25 millimeters. So I'm going to mark that. So that's going to be the wall thickness and the diameter of the second bowl. And then I'll go ahead and mark where that cutting tip is, the space that it'll cut as it's making the cut. And now you can see the 3 bowls. At this point, we don't really need the tool rest anymore, and I need to get out of the way. So instead of taking it completely off the lathe, what I like to do is I like to just pop the bowl off the chuck, and then I'll slide the banjo and the tool rest up underneath the headstock, so it's out of the way now. We're going to need that space for the coring system. Okay, so the plate that the coring system has a simple little locking clamp that fits the space between the 2 rails on the bed. So you want to put that block in place and snug it up. And then we've got 2 post supports. One is for the center knife and the other one is for the support for the knife. Each knife set has a matching supporting curve. This is the number 1 knife set, which has about a 5.5 inch swing on it. And that would be about a 13 centimeter swing. So I'm going to attach the handle to this knife. Now they call the curved portion a cutting knife, but the actual tip is what's doing the cutting. What I'm doing here is I'm going to position the system the way to make the cut that I need to make. First of all, I need to know how deep these bowls will be. And I'm going to measure the thickness of the first bowl. And again, that's about 1.25 inches, about 33 millimeters from the base of the bowl. And I'll mark that. I'm just going to make a mark on the side of the bowl of how deep that one should go. And I'm marking that from the face of the top of the bowl. Now I'm going to yeah, that's about 4 centimeters coming off the side there. You really want to take your time and measure this and think about, I do this visually. I look and I imagine that cutting knife and the rotation and how deep that rotation is going to go into the bowl itself. So here's the deepest, this will be the depth of the large bowl. Now I'm going to measure the second bowl, and this is about 6 centimeters in. So I'm going to mark where that's going to cross. Now I don't want to come in, so it's going to be about 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters deep. The arm of this knife has a 5-inch or 13 centimeter swing. Right from the tip of the tape measure there is the rotation point. So that's where I'm measuring from. I can see there's the 5-inch or 13 centimeter mark, and I'm looking straight down on the top of it. I'm also measuring the distance between, right there's our pivot point. I'm measuring the distance between the bowl blank and that pivot point, and it's about 4 centimeters there. So I'm positioning the tip of the cutting knife right on the 2 lines that I already drew, and I'm spacing it back away from the depth of the bowl. So that swing should give me the depth that I'm looking for the first bowl. So what I do at this point is I lock the plate of the coring system very carefully. Just take your time and lock that down. And then I move the support arm right underneath the cutting knife and tighten it down. And we're ready to start making the first cut. Now when we're cutting with the coring system, we do not need a very fast lathe speed. I'm probably turning at maybe 400 or 500 RPMs. Now again, I don't have an RPM readout on my lathe. The other thing I'm going to be doing is as soon as that knife is in a little bit deeper, I'm going to be able to move the tailstock up. I'm going to use that for added support. The first cuts that the knife is making are scraping cuts, or they're all scraping cuts, but they're going against that end grain at about a 90-degree angle. So you're going to get a lot of fine dust initially, and it's going to be a little bit hard cutting at first. You can see the knife, and if you go too aggressively, it can slow down the lathe, or you can get the belt to skip on your lathe too. So you want to just take your time, and you need to also back the knife out frequently to get the shavings out of the groove so that they don't bind up in there. And you just take your time, do a little bit at a time, back the knife out, clean the shavings off. Now you can see as the knife gets a little bit deeper, I'm getting more shavings. That's because it's getting around to the side grain material, and it's making those curly shavings. Now I've got enough room to get the tailstock in there for some support. I'm just basically moving it in and pulling it out, and then make sure that you clear the shavings each time. Just a little bit at a time. You don't have to be doing anything really fast here. Okay, so once there's a little bit of depth that's been cut, you want to rotate the supporting bracket underneath the knife and put it into the channel that's been cut. Now that support arm needs to be perfectly lined up and parallel to the cutting knife. So you can put your hand there and you can feel that they're lined up. And you want to get it pretty deep into that hole, but not up against the bowl blank. The bowl blank should be able to spin freely. And then carefully tighten that back up. Now I hold that base plate so I don't accidentally torque it and change the rotation of that plate. I want everything to stay in the same position as I'm making this cut. All right, then we just pick up where we left off. Just keep removing material and making sure that that area stays clear. Yeah, unfortunately, there's not much artistic opportunity here. You're basically confined to cutting out a round chunk of wood, but it's a great time saver, and it does prevent, wasting all that material and just making a big pile of shavings, which would happen if you didn't have a coring system like this. All right, then periodically, you're going to want to stop. Once that groove gets a little deeper, you're going to stop and work that support arm in a little bit deeper as well, so you have more support. You don't ever want to have the knife overextended into that cutting space without support underneath it. Yeah, it's just a fun process. It's really satisfying to be able to get multiple bowls from one bowl blank. Here you can see the shavings are accumulating much quicker when the knife is wrapped around the back side. You're cutting that side grain. It's kind of just tearing material out. Much easier than the initial cuts are against that end grain, and it's a little bit more difficult for the knife to make good clean cuts. But once it's down into the bottom of it, it cuts really efficiently. As a matter of fact, you can slow the lathe down when you're coming towards the end of the cut. Now when the handle is parallel to the surface of the bowl, the top rim surface, that knife is pretty much also at the bottom center of that bowl blank, so it's going to be breaking off pretty quickly once the tool knife is close to parallel to the front. We're almost there. I'm going to move this in just a little bit more just to make sure that I've got good support while I'm in there. And I've got the lathe speed down, and there you go. There's our first bowl blank. All right, we'll set that aside. If you're enjoying this video, do me a huge favor and click that like button right below the screen. Yeah, the like button, the little thumbs up. Yeah, click that. Thank you. Okay, so every cut you make with the coring system, you basically want to loosen up the base plate and the support arm and basically reposition them. Now, this bowl it's only 13 inches or 33 centimeters across, and I can do both of these cuts with this one knife. If you notice that the first cut I made, I wasn't really centered and I wasn't making as big of a cut, so I actually made a smaller bowl with this knife. Now I'm going to try to make the maximum sized bowl this knife will make, which is about an 11-inch bowl. So I'm going to bring the center pivot post right up against the bowl blank. That's another reason why we cleaned up the face of the bowl blank before we started. That support right there in the middle, you can see I'm right up against the bowl blank. Obviously I don't want it touching, but there's just a hair of space between there. And that's going to give me the closest rotation. And now I'm measuring the depth of how deep that will be cutting, and it's going to cut down to the point that you're seeing right there, about 4.5 inches or 11 centimeters deep. And I line up the cutting tip with that little groove that we drew earlier. Now I'm going to tighten up the plate again. Once that plate's tightened, that doesn't come. You gotta be really careful with that, especially when the shavings accumulate there. It makes it really easy for that wrench to pop off. And I'll tell you what, I wrapped my knuckle pretty good, and you'll see that in just a bit. It really smarts. Okay, so we do the same process here. Now, there are multiple knife sizes that are available. I have the number 2 knife, which makes about a 14-inch bowl blank. And there's another larger one than that. I haven't yet to use that myself personally. But if you're able to get to like a 15 or 16-inch bowl blank, that would be like in the 40 centimeter range, then you can use multiple different size knives to make the inside bowl blanks. And those knife sets will just simply drop right into those same pivot holes. They're just a slightly different sized arc. So same process here, basically working through, pulling out, making sure the material doesn't accumulate inside the kerf of the cutting groove. And the tailstock being there for added support is a huge benefit. I have a tailstock extension in there that you might want to check out. I'll have that listed in the description below, along with all the other materials that we're using here, if you want to check that out. I use that on a regular basis, and I really like that extension. Okay, so I'm going to take the support arm and work it into the new cut groove and make sure it's lined up with the knife. And I'll tighten that up. You know, Glenn Lucas makes a set of levers that go in on this particular coring system that replace those bolts, and it makes it really nice so you're not wrapping your knuckles into the side of the lathe like I did earlier. That's something to check out. The larger the curve and the deeper the bowl, you really want to make sure that material doesn't build up inside that space. I have bound it up before and brought the lathe to a screeching halt, and it's not good, obviously. And you just keep working that support arm in. Again, you don't want to jam it all the way into the back. You want to spin the bowl and make sure that it can spin freely and it's not rubbing. The cutting tip needs to be taken off about every 2 or 3 bowls. That tip needs to be taken off and sharpened. There's a sharpening kit for it that will help you hold it. It's like a mount that you can hold the tip in, and you can bring it up to your sharpening station and sharpen it on the platform. The really interesting thing that you can do, instead of turning the the grinding wheel on, you can simply just turn the wheel by hand and just lightly sharpen the tip. By not turning the grinder on, you won't remove a ton of material from it. It is a really small little cutting tip, and if you grind it a whole bunch, it's going to disappear pretty quickly. But just by turning it by hand, you can create a nice sharp edge on it, and you're not removing that much material. Okay, so I'm working in the support arm a little bit farther. And again, you really want to make sure you hold that plate, because you're applying so much torque with the leverage of that wrench. You can easily rotate that plate, and then your curve is off from the cutting tool and you're going to have issues. So you want to make sure that plate does not move while you're tightening the support arm base. Now see how the handle's almost parallel with the top rim of the bowls. That's how you know we're getting really close. You can also hear the sound difference because it's cutting through a little bit hollow material, and you got that hollow bowl moving around. You can slow down here because you're cutting with the grain of the wood. You don't have to be going that fast. You can see how slow this is going. It's maybe a couple hundred RPMs at this point. All right, it should be through now. I'm past parallel. And you can see it's moving just a little bit there. It's going to go any second. Sometimes they don't pop out like that first one did, and that's okay. You can basically back up the tailstock, and you can see if it's loose, and that's what I'm going to do here in just a second. You can take the wrench and pry this out, but only do this on the side grain areas. If you do it on the end grain areas, you can tear the end grain in the bottom. If you do it in the side grain, it has a tendency to pop off. Just like that. And there's our second bowl blank. All right. So we have 3 bowl blanks. That's the fun thing too, is when you do the second one, then the third one's completed at the same time. So we're done using the coring system at this point. So I'm going to take the knife and the support arm off, and then I'll take the plate off of the lathe. Now I need to get the tool rest and the banjo back out. Now I want to remove that little nub in the center of the bottom of the bowl. It has some torn out end grain in it. If you think of it like a wick, almost like a candle wick, that's going to be an area that can dry out really quick because of those loose torn out fibers there. So instead of leaving them like they are, I'm going to go ahead and trim those off so the bottom of the bowl is relatively smooth. My regular tool rest isn't quite reaching, so I'm going to use my longer J tool rest. And I'm going to use my 5/8 inch micro bevel bowl gouge. This is a great tool to reach down into a deep bowl like this to make an easy cut. If you want to learn more about the micro bevel bowl gouge, check out my video all about the micro bevel bowl gouge, secret weapon. So I'm going to basically turn this off and make it flush and get all that. I want all that loose, torn out end grain removed because that's a great place for the moisture to escape too quickly. All right, there we go. And so again, we're not trying to make any perfect shapes at this point. We're just, you can see my knuckle that got wrapped up against the lathe right there. Okay, so here they are. All right, so now I'm using this product called Anchor Seal. This is kind of like a wax latex sealant, and it works really good for sealing the end grain. And the reason we want to seal the end grain is if you think about them as like the open ends of straws, they're going to let moisture out really quickly. The end grain is both on the inside of the bowl and the outside of the bowl. I've already painted the outside of the bowl, and now I'm doing the inside portion. I'll have a link for the Anchor Seal in the description below if you want to check that out. But the side grain doesn't really need to be sealed off. If you think of the side grain like the straws, it's like the side grain are the sides of the straws, and the end grain are the ends or the tips. Well, most of the moisture is going to quickly escape the ends or the tips of the straws, and that's what we're sealing up, so we're slowing it out. It kind of evens up the amount of moisture that's going to evaporate from the bowl and makes it evaporate more evenly so it doesn't have a tendency to crack. Okay, so now I take these bowls, and what I do is I use some scrap pieces of wood. Use 3 pieces of scrap wood, and you can stack them inside one another just the way they came out. This is going to allow for enough air movement around them that they can dry out. These can be placed on a shelf, or if you have like a passive dryer, you can put them in there, and there you go. We've just made 3 bowl blanks from 1 chunk of wood. I got to tell you, that's very satisfying. All right, there you go. That's how you can get multiple bowl blanks from 1 chunk of wood. Now, it's a super cool technique. It's very efficient. It's time saving, and it's really resourceful. It's really using the materials without making a lot of waste. But there's a little bit of a downside to this, and that downside is you kind of have to wait if you're going to twice turn. Now, you essentially have 3 bowl blanks. If you want to continue and finish up each one of those bowl blanks, you can, but you don't have to. You could twice turn this, let it dry, then twice turn it. Now, I get the argument a lot. I get people say, well, I want that instant satisfaction, and I want to finish the bowl and be done with it, and I just want to get it done. Well, I'll tell you what most people don't consider is that the coring doesn't really take that long to do, and we're just roughing those surfaces, so we're not really trying to get a smooth finish cut necessarily. We don't want ripped out grain, but we're not trying to make everything perfect on this first turning. So it goes pretty quick, and what you've done is you've essentially done half of the work of turning a bowl. So you set this aside, let it dry. If you've got a dryer, it might take a few weeks. If you put it on the shelf, it could take a year. But what's interesting is you're probably going to find other things to turn in the meantime, and you're going to forget about these blanks. I know, because I thought the same thing. I thought, I'm going to turn a few of these, and I'm going to try to wait, but I'm going to turn them too early, and they're not going to be dry. Well, guess what? I completely forgot about them. I did. And I had other wood that came in that I found, people gave me, so I just kept turning. And before long, I went back and looked at these bowl blanks, and I looked at the date on them, which, by the way, that's a great idea. Take a marker and mark the date, and put the type of wood on the bottom of it too. If you do a bunch of these and they're all stacked up, you might forget what kind of wood it is. So I went back and I looked at what I had in my stack, and I had things that were over a year old, and they were completely dry. So they were ready to be twice turned. The weight really isn't that big of a deal. Think of it as like putting money in the bank. You're going to have these beautiful bowl blanks that you can make really nice round bowls with. And the big plus is you've already done half the work with this coring process. You're essentially going to put this back on the lathe, true up the exterior, and then turn the interior, and you're done. That's it. So it's kind of like taking all of the labor and breaking it in half. So I like to do these, and I like to do like 3 or 4 of them at a time. So I come out with about 9 or 12 bowls, and then I'll put them in the dryer and just forget about them. And once they're dry, if I have time to turn them, I'll get to them. But if I don't, I just stack them on the shelf, and then I'll get to them eventually. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope this kind of gives you a little bit of a taste of what can happen when you core out your bowl blanks. If you're into turning wood bowls, or you're curious about turning wood bowls, go check out my website, turnawoodbowl.com. There you're going to find tons of information, all dedicated to the art of turning wood bowls. So go to turnawoodbowl.com and check it out. All right, guys, well, thank you so much for watching this, and until next time, happy turning.